said Old Joe. They reckon he had eyes like a cat.
Orders can be
Unstuffed places are...
Beaming from the world's only interdimensional radio station hurtling through endless black void comes Station Rot. The only radio station that can read your thoughts. That's right. Now, listener, I'm sure you're confused. Is this show being beamed directly into my neurocortex? Yes, for your convenience as well as ours. You see, it gives us a guaranteed unwilling audience. And they say building a regular listenership is the hardest part. Now, listener, I come to you with a story. One from a world very much like our own. In fact, it's so very close, I bet you've glimpsed it before. Perhaps in an unfamiliar reflection in a window or the mirror. Perhaps a simple case of deja vu. Perhaps a nasty case of sleep paralysis. You've seen it somewhere, creeping in the periphery. Well, don't get too frightened. I'm sure you're safe enough. Though I am also sure that your world has monsters of a sort as well. Just keep your eyes and ears open. It looks like today's story is about family and tradition. Just in time for the holidays, huh? Station Rot, Episode 1, Grandmother's Farm.
Prison is not an easy place to bounce back from. They don't try to reform you nor give you any ways to rejoin normal society. Not really. I was a third-time offender, and with no family that cared, I wasn't bailed out. Wouldn't have mattered much anyway. The court proceedings took less than 2 hours. 6 years for assault with a deadly weapon. 6 years. Suppose I should be thankful it wasn't more. The guy I broke wasn't a particularly upstanding citizen, so they went lightly on me, I think. It was more than anything a nuisance. I knew the second I got out, I'd go right back to the same kind of shady guys that hired me in the first place. I never really meant to do that kind of work either. I think it's just something you fall into. Wrong place, wrong time, you know? When my time was up, I expected to hitchhike to the nearest city and hopefully find some people looking for a big man with a closed mouth willing to do bad things for cheap. Instead, I found in the near-empty parking lot of the state penitentiary my frail, 90-something grandmother in her ancient wood-paneled teal station wagon. My family and I are not close. I consider those living to be useless trash who have only brought me grief, but my grandmother was always kind to me. The few times I met her, at least. She was that kind of relative, you know? You saw her as a kid maybe 2 or 3 times. But I knew about her. Mom wouldn't shut up about her. I knew she immigrated to this country just by her accent, but nobody ever told me where from. She was secluded enough where she, avoided most of the family drama while she relaxed at her farm. But there she was, like a ghost, a woman I probably hadn't seen in a decade, standing in that desolate lot smiling at me. She waved me over and I got into her car, more out of shock than anything. And I guess I didn't have anywhere else to go. First thing she did was open the glove box and pull out a packed lunch for me. Ham on rye with fresh lettuce, tomatoes, homemade mayonnaise. It was the best meal I'd had in years. I'd never been to her farm. I only knew about it from the snide remarks my mother would make, complaining she must be rich to own that much land, saying she deserved that money, that she deserved it more. I always thought of her farm as some grand palace by how bitter she was about it. It always came down to money. Always does. We pulled down a long dirt road until we were maybe 2 hours from the next building, and there it was, an old, albeit well-taken-care-of farmhouse with one small field being used on the many acres of land that must have remained untouched for 20 years now. Wasn't any palace, but it was nice enough. I saw trees growing where I imagined there used to be corn. Huge property. I remember seeing all sorts of animals as we drove in, deer, coyotes. I thought I saw a bear once too, but she told me they weren't in the area. It must have been some big stray or something. I've lived from city to city my whole life, so being out in the country was a change of pace. It's not as quiet as I imagined. The noises of the nature living there definitely filled the space. Sometimes it seemed even louder than a city street. It's funny, she had her two types of clothes. If we were going out somewhere, she would dress better than I ever have. But if she was working, it was always the same old beat-up flannel and jeans. She would always say she loved her American blue jeans. She said it was the best part of this country. She always said it like that. Her age was undeniably catching up to her, though. She asked me if in exchange for food and a room I could help her through her days, and I agreed. It may have been the first time I was actually, happy. I felt like I had a guidance for the first time, a familial love in my life that I don't think I ever had. It took me a while to get used to that, but I think subconsciously everyone really needs that kind of thing. I've always been an angry guy, but not at her farm. Never with her. She had this calming presence. She could make anything feel like a trivial matter, like she had seen everything before. The wisdom of an elderly farmer. It was nice. She took great care of her field. Her property was expansive, maybe a few hundred acres across, but she only farmed on one plot anymore. I asked her why once. She said she didn't have the time or strength for more. Of course, this prompted me to ask why she didn't hire any help, but she said it wasn't her way. She certainly had the money. I had to help her file her taxes, so I was well aware of that. Help was something she was always touchy about. I think she just didn't want to admit how slow she had started moving, at least to anyone but the only person she knew with nowhere else to go. Not that that's a negative thing, though, I think she was just scared. Didn't want to admit how old she had gotten. Maybe she was just lonely. She was very relaxed about everything except when it came to her field. Religiously, every day she would wake up and say a prayer over it. She would do this once at sunrise and once at sunset. She taught it to me, Old Norse words. I only knew what the beginning meant. She never really told me the English translation for the rest of it. I had some trouble remembering it. I wasn't much of a student, and prayer is an alien thing to me. My father was Catholic, made us go to church and everything before he drank himself to death. I never liked anything in my life to relate to my father, so I put prayer far out of my mind. Though this prayer was rather simple, even in a different language. She said it was basically a rephrasing of the same idea. Sow the seeds, harvest the crops. Sow the seeds, harvest the crops. I learned through that our family was Scandinavian. When I asked which country, she just laughed and moved the conversation on as if the question was foolish. I couldn't really place her accent either. I worked with a Norwegian guy once. She didn't sound like him. Another time I asked her when she came to America. She said it had been so long she had forgotten. I also asked her why. She never answered that. That's fair enough, though. Most people don't flee their country for a fun reason, at least not somebody her age. A lot of wars in Europe. When it came to her farm, she cared for her field fiercely, never once missing a prayer, watering it the exact amount it would need every day with collected rainwater. There never seemed to be a drought while I was there. She was so careful when it came to the harvesting. It was one of the few parts of the farming I wasn't allowed to help with. She would slowly and meticulously harvest each thing. It was a diverse mix of things, too, since most of it was just for her to eat fresh or to preserve. Melons, corn, tomatoes, strawberries, at least 10 more things I can't remember. I wondered passively how these could all grow together, but not once did I really question it. She was so stubborn the crops had to grow for her. At least that's how I must have seen it. In the time I stayed with her, we both knew she was on death's door. Every little injury got more severe, and every day she needed more basic help. She refused to go to the hospital, even if I was ever concerned. And then one day, she was dead. I found her slumped over outside where she would kneel and pray. Her hands were still together. The woman who helped me get my life back on track had passed away and left me everything she owned. I didn't care about the money or the house at the time, only that the 2 years I got to spend with her were the best ones of my rotten life. My mother then called, maybe a dozen times every day. I told her if she set foot on my property, she wouldn't walk again. She doesn't deserve a penny of this money or square foot of this land. None of them do. I fell into a depressive slump for weeks after that, maybe months. In my line of business, you don't make any real friends, so I was alone in my house, grieving. I emptied her cabinets of aquavit, some Scandinavian hard liquor. She carried a surprising amount. I'd never seen her drink much. I generally avoided drinking unless one of my bosses insisted. I saw what it did to dear old Dad and knew it would probably happen to me too. We have the same temper after all. That aquavit went down pretty smooth, though. One night, in what I saw as a moment of drunken clarity, I spread her ashes in the field she cared so much about. I thought it was what she would have wanted, what her crops would have liked. I kept the farm going in her memory. I wasn't as good as she was, though. I did try. I tried to keep the prayers going, too, for a while, but it was just too hard. It started out that I would do them morning and night, then morning and night became night, then night became tomorrow, and tomorrow never came. She was so insistent on the prayers, but I couldn't bear to do it anymore. I barely remembered half the words anyway. She had tried teaching me a few times, but my memory has never been phenomenal. Too much head trauma. I felt like a coward more than anything else. I've done some pretty terrible things in my time, but I couldn't manage to get up and do some prayers. It's pathetic. Once the prayers went out the window, the most I could manage to do was water the one plot she had. I would make sure at the same time every day, if it didn't rain, I'd turn on the irrigation system for something like half an hour. Just didn't have the sense for it like she did. Even with this effort, the crops started to dry up. I would increase the water when the soil started to crumble and crack, but no matter how much I watered it, it never seemed like enough. I remember on one occasion I sat and I watched the sprinkler for 3 hours until there was no rainwater left, and I saw the dry soil only crumble further. The crops cracked, slumped down, no color left in them. I stumbled into that plot that day, and I laid there in the dry dirt with the sprinkler still on, and I hoped it would all consume me. I had nothing left. At least that's what I thought. I started to have nightmares right after that. I would wake up screaming or silently in a cold sweat, catching my breath. Every day after that, I got less and less sleep, waking up at odd hours or in a different place than I fell asleep. I think I remember reading somewhere that grief can cause insomnia or sleepwalking, so I just tried to take it in stride. That is, until I woke up on one particularly quiet night. I woke up and heard nothing. Absolute silence. And opening my eyes, I realized I was in the field, among the dead crops and dry dirt. It was the same place my body had laid weeks ago when I accepted my life was in ruin. The silence was more startling than the sleepwalking, though. Normally there are thousands of crickets, frogs, coyotes, even the odd mountain lion, anything, but no. There was only silence now. I stood up, quickly falling back to the ground, now noticing large bruises on my legs. I stood back up, now limping, out of the field. The second I stepped out of it, this wall of sound hit me all at once. Every sound that I had gotten used to in the night there now seemed loud and abrasive, unfamiliar even. I limped back into the house and lay sleepless on the floor, covering my ears. I started remembering pieces of the nightmares. A tall man with great antlers, the feeling of being pulled, the feeling of running. I started getting more bruises on my legs and arms, and on one particular night, a pretty deep gash. It was like one I got in a knife fight before, but no. It was rougher than a knife. All the marks were in places I could reach, though. I thought maybe I was doing it to myself, some form of anxiety taken to an extreme. I thought about going to the hospital, but with my record, walking into a hospital with fresh wounds and bruises didn't sound smart. I had no alibi. I'd lived alone in a house for weeks now. I tried saying her prayers in the field again. I woke up for the third night in a row in the dirt and the silence, and I did the only thing I could think to do. The moment I started to say those old ritualistic words, the gash on my leg that had just barely healed over started to gush. I looked down at it far calmer than I should have, and I saw the dry soil begin to drink. Hunger began to overtake me for days after this. Though everything I ate tasted like ash, I would eat and eat, but the hunger would never be satiated. One day, I awoke in the dirt once again, and the hunger left me as quickly as it had come. I felt so relieved at this development that I elected to ignore the fact that I tasted soil. There was a tall man that would visit me at night. The tall man had antlers so large and so great I couldn't see their end in the night sky. He visited me in my dreams and pulled me towards the field, his field. There I would wake up and go back into the house, the markings of hands on my legs and arms, soil falling loosely out of my mouth. I should have burned the field, I think. While I still had the strength. I doubt it would have done much, though. It's already dead. I called my mom. I told her I was sorry. I told her she could have the farm, the money, everything. All she needed to do was come. She must have called me 40 times on her way up, saying whatever bile came to her mind at the time, trying to ask for directions hours ahead of time, forgetting them right away. That's the most patient I've ever been before. I was so tired, so weak. But this was something I could do. I used to be so strong. Now I've lost 30 pounds in a matter of a few weeks. But no matter. I used the last of my strength to show her the farm when she finally came. You know, she parked on the grass when she got here. Could have pulled into the lot, but no, she decided the grass was fine. I gave her the tour. I finally slept that night. No sleepwalking, no nightmares, just sleep. I went outside to breathe the fresh morning air, and I saw in the field a tangle of new growth. New plants started growing where I put her, tall stalks with crimson red flowers. They were so beautiful. But throughout the rest of the day, they quickly wilted and died. Not enough substance, maybe. I only got one good night's sleep from all that effort, all those phone calls. The next day I woke up out of bed once again. How much had I bled into the field? I try to think back, but I grow weary by the day. The tall man has started knocking on my window, inviting me to the field, but I do not want to go. The field is hungry. Its songs and prayers were halted, and now it craves. I woke up in the field this morning, my legs submerged in the dry dirt, and I dug myself out. How many days do I have left? I wonder how many days until the field grows greedy, until a simple gash on the leg or arm is not enough. Even my own mother wasn't enough. The tall man sings in the night. He sings lost chants in old tongues. His voice is the wind and the bugs and the trees. He leaves runes carved upon my windowsill. The tall man weeps, for his field is dead and his last priestess is gone. His antlers grow jagged and brittle and are beginning to bleed. His patience is corrupted. I wake up in the field and wonder how many days are left. How many days until it all consumes me, and the tall man returns to the soil. The tall man knocks again tonight. He beckons me with broken claws as he sings his songs of mourning. He invites me to the field, gently, this time. I don't want to go. Maybe I'll call my brother.
What happens to a god when it dies? When its followers begin to age and slump over? When its traditions aren't passed down? When a conqueror comes and spreads their religion? What happens? Do they simply stand by and watch as their statues are demolished, as their memories are tarnished? Or do they struggle, kicking and screaming, clawing at the floorboards, desperate to stay? Either way, it looks like our main character didn't do too well for themselves. Not exactly what I would call a get-out-of-jail-free card. Too soon? Well, I just hope you enjoyed our first episode of Station Rot, Grandmother's Farm. I would say be sure to look out for the next one, but as you know, our show is beamed directly into your neural cortex. So even if you don't want to listen to it, you will be. Station Rot is a horror anthology podcast, written and produced, and I guess everything else by Nicos Wiard. Thanks for listening.